She stole from a dying woman. My sister screamed across the hospice hallway as every single person in my family turned to stare at me. I was still holding my grandmother's medication bag when my uncle ripped my phone out of my hand and demanded to see my bank app. My name is Priya, and 8 years ago, while my grandmother was dying from cancer, thousands of dollars vanished from her emergency care account. Before I could even process what was happening, my sister Nisha told everyone I took it. And the worst part, she had proof. A transfer linked to my laptop, my login, my information. My own father looked me dead in the face and said, "Tell the truth for once." I kept trying to explain that none of it made sense, that I'd been asleep in the waiting room all night, but nobody was listening anymore. Then, right as the hospice nurse started walking toward us, holding my grandmother's chart, Nisha suddenly grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks and whispered, "Just let them blame you. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates." I remember just staring at her. Not angry at first, confused. Because Nisha was crying so hard her mascara was running down her face, and everyone around us looked at her like she was the victim. My aunt was holding her shoulders. My cousin kept glaring at me like I was some kind of criminal. And meanwhile, my grandmother was 20 feet away in a hospice room, dying. "Nisha," I whispered, "what are you talking about?" She let go of my arm immediately when she noticed people watching us again. Then she stepped back and covered her mouth like she was terrified of me. That's what made everyone believe her. The performance. My uncle shoved my phone back into my chest. "Your grandmother trusted you," he snapped. "How could you do this now?" I could barely process what was happening. 2 hours earlier, I'd been helping adjust my grandmother's blankets while she slept. Nisha had been handling paperwork at the front desk with her boyfriend Marcus. Everything had felt tense but normal. Now suddenly, I was being accused of stealing nearly $40,000 from the woman who practically raised me. "I didn't touch her money," I said louder this time. Nobody answered. Not my father. Not my mother. Not even Nisha. The hospice nurse awkwardly stopped in the middle of the hallway, still holding my grandmother's chart against her chest. You could tell she wanted no part of whatever was happening. Then my father asked the question that changed everything. "If you didn't take it," he said slowly, "why did the transfer come from your computer?" I opened my mouth and froze. Because I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. And the second that hesitation hit my face, I watched my entire family decide I was guilty. My mother started crying quietly. My aunt pulled her purse closer when she walked past me. Even Marcus shook his head like he was disappointed in me. That part still makes me sick. Because out of everyone standing there that night, Marcus looked the least surprised. Then the hospice nurse finally spoke. Softly, carefully. "Priya," she said, "your grandmother is asking for you." But before I could take a single step toward her room, my father blocked the hallway. And what he said next destroyed the last piece of my life I still had left. My father didn't raise his voice. That was the worst part. He just stood there in the middle of the hospice hallway, exhausted and furious, and said, "You are not going into her room until you tell us the truth." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "Dad, I didn't do anything," I said. "Please, Grandma asked for me." "She asked for all of us," Nisha cut in quickly, wiping tears from her face. "Don't twist this around." The nurse shifted uncomfortably beside the door. "Sir, your mother specifically asked for Priya." "We'll handle this as a family," my father interrupted. And just like that, the door closed. I never forgot the sound it made. I spent the next hour trying to explain myself while relatives circled around me near the waiting area vending machines like I was on trial. Every answer I gave somehow made things worse. Yes, I'd recently lost my job. Yes, I knew Grandma's banking passwords because I helped pay her medical bills online before hospice. Yes, the transfer came from my laptop. It sounded terrible even to me. But there were things that didn't add up. Nisha had suddenly taken over all of Grandma's finances the month before. She wouldn't let anyone else handle paperwork anymore, not even me. And Marcus was constantly around, offering to help with accounts and insurance forms even though nobody asked him to. I remembered one night catching him alone with my laptop at Grandma's house. At the time, he'd laughed it off. "Relax," he'd said, "mine died, I just needed to print something." Back then, I didn't think twice about it. Now that memory made my stomach turn. Around 3 in the morning, my cousin walked into the waiting room holding printed bank statements. "I found the transfer timestamp," he announced. Everyone crowded around him. Then my uncle looked directly at me and said, "The money moved at 2:13 a.m. I blinked, because at 2:13 a.m. I hadn't even been near my laptop. I'd been asleep in a chair beside my grandmother's bed. And someone in that hospital knew it. Then Nisha suddenly stood up and said something that made the entire room go silent. Maybe she wasn't asleep the whole night. Maybe she wasn't asleep the whole night. The second Nisha said it, I felt every person in that waiting room pull away from me emotionally. Not one person defended me. My mother stared at the floor. My uncle folded his arms tighter across his chest. Even my cousins stopped looking confused and started looking suspicious. I stood up so fast the metal chair scraped loudly against the tile. "You know that's not true," I said. Nisha wouldn't meet my eyes. "She disappeared for a while around midnight," she murmured. "I didn't want to say anything before because I didn't want to believe it either." That was a lie. A complete lie. I had gone downstairs once to buy coffee from the lobby machine after sitting beside my grandmother for nearly 10 straight hours. I'd been gone maybe 15 minutes. But the way Nisha said it, quiet, shaky, emotional, made it sound sinister. And Marcus immediately backed her up. "She's right," he said carefully. "I saw Priya leave too." I turned toward him so fast my neck hurt. Marcus sat beside Nisha with one arm around her shoulders, looking calm while my entire life collapsed around me. He was always good at that, staying calm while everyone else panicked. "You barely even know me," I snapped. He gave me this disappointed look that still makes me angry when I think about it. "Priya," he said softly, "you need to stop digging yourself deeper." That sentence changed the room. Suddenly nobody was asking questions anymore. They'd already decided what happened. An hour later, my father took my apartment key off his keychain and placed it on the table in front of me. "If you took the money," he said, "you're not staying under my roof." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something. Anything. But she just cried harder. Then the hospice nurse appeared again at the entrance to the waiting room, scanning the family nervously. "There's another issue," she said. Everyone turned toward her. She hesitated before speaking. "The remaining balance for your grandmother's treatment account was just frozen." Then Marcus suddenly stood up. And for the first time that entire night, he looked nervous. Marcus stood so quickly his chair tipped backward into the wall. It was subtle, most people probably missed it. But I saw it. That tiny crack in his calm expression. My uncle immediately asked, "What does that mean, frozen?" The nurse looked overwhelmed. There was an alert placed on the account after the transfer was reported. Administration says no additional payments can be processed until the fraud investigation is reviewed. My stomach dropped. My grandmother's care depended on that account. Nisha grabbed Marcus's arm. "You said they wouldn't freeze it." The word slipped out before she could stop herself. The entire room went quiet. Marcus looked at her sharply, too sharply. "What?" my father asked. Nisha immediately shook her head. "Nothing, I just meant." But the damage was already done. Because suddenly everyone noticed what I had noticed all night. Marcus had been weirdly involved in everything. The paperwork, the bank calls, the account details. Even now, he was the one answering most of the questions instead of Nisha. I looked directly at him. "Why would you know whether the account would be frozen?" For the first time, Marcus didn't answer immediately. And that silence hit me harder than any accusation. Then he forced a laugh, because I've been helping your sister deal with the bank all week, obviously. But his voice sounded tight now. Controlled. Nisha looked pale. And I suddenly remembered something else. 3 weeks earlier, Grandma had asked me privately if I thought Marcus was trustworthy. At the time, I thought she was just being protective. Now my pulse started hammering. What did you do? I asked him. Marcus's entire expression changed. Not panicked. Cold. He stepped closer to me and lowered his voice enough that only I could hear him. You should really stop talking before you make this worse for yourself. A chill went down my spine. Because it wasn't a warning. It sounded like a threat. Then, before I could respond, the hospice room door suddenly opened behind us. And the nurse looked directly at my father. You need to come now, she said quietly. Your mother's condition is changing fast. The entire family rushed toward the hallway. I tried to follow. But Nisha turned, blocked my path for a second, and whispered through tears. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Then she walked into my grandmother's room. And the door closed in my face. I never got to say goodbye to my grandmother. That door stayed closed for nearly 40 minutes, while I sat alone in the hospice hallway staring at the floor, hearing muffled crying from inside the room. Nobody came out to talk to me. Nobody asked me if I was okay. At some point, Marcus walked past carrying bottled waters for my family like he belonged there more than I did. He didn't even look at me. Then just before sunrise, my father stepped out of the room with red eyes and said the words I already knew were coming. She's gone. I stood up immediately. I want to see her. But he blocked the doorway again. The same way he had earlier. No, he said quietly, not right now. Right now. As if there would ever be another chance. I remember looking over his shoulder and seeing Nisha crying against Marcus's chest, while relatives surrounded her protectively. And in that moment, I realized something devastating. They weren't treating me like family anymore. They were treating me like a threat. Within a week, I was completely cut off. My parents stopped answering my calls. My engagement ended after my fiancé's family heard the rumors spreading through our community. One aunt actually told people I stolen from a dying woman because I was desperate for money. I lost friends without explanation. People stopped inviting me places. And eventually, I stopped trying to defend myself because nobody wanted answers. They wanted someone to blame. So I left. I moved to another city, worked night shifts, rented tiny apartments, and spent 8 years trying not to think about the last day I saw my grandmother alive. And then one night, 8 years later, someone knocked on my apartment door. Hard. When I opened it, my chest nearly stopped. Nisha stood there soaked from the rain holding an old duffel bag against her side. She looked exhausted, older, scared. Not dramatic scared. Real scared. There were bruises on her wrist. And for the first few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I didn't know where else to go. I almost shut the door in her face. But before I could, she pulled a thick envelope from her bag. My grandmother's handwriting was on the front. My name. Everything inside me went cold. What is that? I asked. Nisha started crying immediately. Not the controlled crying from the hospice. Not performance. This looked ugly and exhausted, and years too late. She wrote it before she died, Nisha whispered. I found it hidden in Marcus's old storage boxes. Marcus. Hearing his name after all those years made me sick. Nisha told me everything over the next 2 hours. Marcus had stolen the money. Not me. He'd accessed my laptop weeks earlier when he borrowed it at Grandma's house. He used saved passwords to move the money through an account connected to one of his shell companies. Then he convinced Nisha that if she exposed him, they'd both be ruined. And Nisha, terrified, pregnant, emotionally drowning while Grandma was dying, went along with it. But the worst part wasn't the theft. It was this. Grandma had started doubting the story before she died. Nisha admitted Grandma asked for me privately that final night because she wanted to speak to me alone. And Nisha told the nurses I'd already left the hospital. That confession hit harder than the theft ever could. I couldn't breathe for a second. "You stole my last chance to see her," I said. Nisha just nodded and cried harder. Marcus eventually abandoned her anyway, drained her savings, left her in debt, disappeared after fraud complaints started catching up to him. And all those years later, she finally found evidence tying him directly to the stolen money: old bank records, emails, transaction logs, everything. Enough to prove I'd been telling the truth the entire time. Then I opened my grandmother's letter. Inside she wrote, "Priya, I do not believe you betrayed me. I may not understand everything happening around me, but I know your heart." I broke down the second I read that line. 8 years. 8 years believing the last thing my grandmother thought of me was disappointment. And it was all built on a lie. The truth eventually spread through the family after the evidence came out. My father came to apologize in person for the first time in nearly a decade. My mother cried the entire visit. Some relatives admitted they'd always had doubts. Others avoided me completely because facing the truth made them feel guilty. As for Nisha, I didn't forgive her. Not fully. Some damage doesn't disappear just because the truth finally shows up. But I also didn't turn her away that night. Because sitting in front of me wasn't the powerful sister who destroyed my life anymore. It was someone who'd helped ruin both of ours. The last time I visited my grandmother's grave, I brought the letter with me. And before I left, I read the final line one more time. One day the truth will arrive, even if it comes too late.